Rick, how are you, my friend?
Good morning, Keith Jones. Good to hear from you and see your smiling face.
Thank you. I was thinking that the summer was coming early because we had some 80-degree days here in the Phoenix area. And then the weather shifted a bit, and I wake up to these beautiful photos of snow on your deck there in Sedona. Man, it's beautiful. Talking about
Yeah,
practicing a little bit of novelty.
well, that's another thing to be grateful for is the beautiful weather we have up here. It's just astounding. You can watch the clouds roll in, and where I live, it's sort of on the edge of Sedona, so it's not really in the downtown part. And so there's more of a perspective, and you can watch the weather roll in and clear off. And heck, we had a couple of inches of snow, but because the weather was so warm before that, and the ground's so warm, it didn't stick. So the morning was just a wonderland of white, and then by noon it was all gone.
Being out in nature, as I'm sure you were to take advantage of that time, I found it to be a really a clearing experience for me when I'm out in nature. And so I want
Yeah.
to use that as a segue to talk about forgiveness and how you see it, how you're able to grant it or give it to others or receive it, or just your take on it. Can you riff a little bit about how forgiveness shows up for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in all of our lives to withhold love and to disrespect or to hate because we feel like if we've been wrong, then we owe the other person a wrong, or our self respect demands that we be defensive about whatever the criticism is or whatever the hurt was that was caused by another. And so I think that that's a basic human starting point that we all have to recognize that it's normal to want to not forgive. But the problem with it is that it not only creates a kind of energy that affects all of the rest of your life, it's like having a poison pill so that you see through all of the things that you want to see through in a way where it's colored by this disrespect or dislike or hate or energy that's not serving you. So when I think of forgiveness, I think of forgiveness as something that I'm doing really for myself. I want to stop the energy that's going toward having any kind of uh, hate or dislike or getting even or punishing or any of that. Um, I think that humans function best when we don't have any of that in our lives. So for me, forgiveness is a way of self-care. It's a way of saying, okay, this thing happened. It's not what I want. It's not what I like. But on the other hand, I am not going to allow myself to get into a funk where I can't enjoy my life by virtue of this blockade that I have for wanting to hurt another or get back or be even with another. So by forgiving, I'm letting go of that. I still remember that there's a hurt. I still remember that there was a wrong, but I'm getting through not having the need to react to it, to punish back, to do something that evens the score. That's where the hurt for me comes in. So forgiveness for me is just a way of letting go. It's a way of appreciating my own life and my own integrity for my own values and letting go of those hateful things that take up space. I don't want that in my life. I want to hold space for things that are joyful, loving, beautiful. And that's what I want to be grateful for and what I want to devote my life to.
Yeah, Rick, I completely agree with you that forgiveness is something that is healthy for me. I can extend it to others. Obviously, if I feel like, I can extend it to others because it creates a clearing between the two
Yes.
of us. And even if the other person is unconscious or trapped into a narrative about something, that's their path. My path is to create a clearing for us in space. And if the other person chooses not to utilize that clearing to create a different kind of experience for themselves and for the two of us, that's okay too. It's
Yeah.
important that I do it for me, and I think it's an act of love for myself. It is also a it's a testament or a example of me appreciating the present moment when I forgive.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. Do you have an example of like what sort of steps you might take, or what works for you? How do you actually get into the mode of forgiving, or do you stay, for example, do you stay angry for a while, or is it like instantaneous that you've been able to train yourself to get out of that, or how do you
Well,
do it? I mean, what's the mechanics?
well, it's a couple of things. One of which is that I have I identify, not identify. What resonates with me is that this thing that we experience called life in the physical form is transient, that is fleeting and that is going away. So every moment of it is valuable to me. So when I am not forgiving, I am squandering that gift, that moment, that precious, thing that I've been granted, that is for me to cherish and to utilize in a very loving and kind way. So by me not forgiving, I may not be conscious that I'm making that choice, but by not forgiving, I am by default choosing not to honor that moment. And that moment, I am ignorant to the fact that life is continuing to the physical form that I'm in, experiencing life. The clock is ticking. It's kind of like when you buy a car, right? You buy a car, the time that you take it off the lot, it's on a journey to zero. I mean, it's just going to zero value. Now, there may be some years that it's able to sustain its value a little bit longer. So I have a Prius. And so when gas prices are up, really high for gas engines, my Prius just kind of holds its value for a little bit longer. I mean, kind of like, and that's what I'm trying to do with my practice, right? My practice is trying to hold, that space longer. But in the physical form, it's a depreciating asset. And so as it continues to appreciate and make its journey to zero, how do I want to experience that journey to zero of dying or death? And the way that I want to experience it is to be conscious, so I am not giving up those very sacred moments. So when you say that it is an act of self-love, of active caring for yourself, it truly is. And for me, I've made it be life or death in terms of how I experience life. Not experience life so much physically, but more experience life spiritually, how I experience life emotionally. I want it to be completely different. So my steps are, one of which is a saying that I repeat to myself every time when I feel like somebody has wronged me or blamed me. I say, your voice is in my ear, and it goes, Keith, none of it matters, and it's all, and it's all going away. I just repeat that, Keith, none of it matters, and it's all going away. And immediately, whatever I thought was this thing that I had to get in a defensive stance for, or this thing like it's impossible the way you wronged me that I can't forgive you, that just melts away from me. And anytime I have a challenge with letting the anger or the hurt or the blame melt away, I know that I've forgotten that none of this matters and that it's all going away. So those are some of the steps that I use, but it didn't happen overnight. It took practice. It took practice. And it took the people like you and some of our other friends who are on this path to wake me up and be like, Keith, dude, have you forgotten that none of this matters and it's all going away? And when you do that, it snaps me out of that trance, out of that narrative that I've become identified with, and then I let it go and I can get back to, oh, this is my practice right now. My practice is to let it go. I mean, I'm trying to every day, not trying as far as being effortful and trying to get somewhere, but by just doing the practice and being mindful of what you've told me, is I am, by just sheer being aware, I'm moving closer toward what Wayne Dyer said, that Rumi said in his poem. Forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet gives off under the heel that has crushed it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I'm like, man, I'm moving more like that. Now, that did not happen overnight for me. But now I experience it more and more and more. And most of what happens is a perceived slight. And even if it is intentional, that's their path. And when I think about it from a very logical standpoint, and I bring the mind in just for a second, because I can't have it there too long, because the ego will show up quickly. But when I think about it from a logical, I understand that I can't control this individual and what they do. So if I don't have any control over them, then what are my choices? To try to exert control over them, which is futile, or to just, as you said, let it go. And forgiveness for me has not become this thing that is impossible to do, that only a few of us in our lifetime are enlightened enough to do. It has become this gateway, this tool to being loving, to being kind. Just like gratitude takes me out of my mind and brings me to the present moment, to all the goodness and gifts in my life, forgiveness frees me of the narrative. It's like a lever, a switch, that as soon as I am aware of it as a choice, it's a choice. As soon as I do that, it stops becoming an exercise or something to do. It becomes something that I can just allow to just wash over me.
Well, that's a very powerful, powerful statement. And I especially love the Rumi quote as well about what kind of power that gives you, that fragrance of that violet being crushed. That fragrance comes from something that's so foreign to us, like letting something go that is hurtful. But you know, one of the things people struggle with is confrontation. And what happens if I don't confront? What happens if I don't retaliate? Doesn't that mean that I'm weak? Doesn't that mean that I'm giving up my personal power? Doesn't it mean that I lose self-respect? And I think, you know, I hope you agree with this, but I think that it's just the opposite. I think that when you rise above it, you're not wallowing in those kinds of ego-based behaviors that cause you trouble in the first place. I mean, the ego is there to protect and also tries to make sure that you're going to survive and defeat anybody who's interested in defeating you. But that's really where the problem starts. That's the beginning of the problem of having revenge and having hate carried with you. And as I said earlier, filling up the space that should be filled with something that's more self-nourishing, like love and gratitude and so forth. One of the things we don't have to do is to let the other person know we're forgiving them. You know, this is an internal, personal exercise. So we can think about all of the things that were wrong that happened to us that we didn't like and go through them and inventory them. And it's totally cool. And I think probably a good idea to feel whatever the emotions are: embarrassment, frustration, anger. Feel those emotions that this incident or the series of incidents that you're struggling with has caused. But at the end of it, after you've experienced it for a while, then you have to be in a position of saying, and that's okay, I'm still intact. I have my own self-respect. I have my own love for self. And I have love for everyone. And that person, just as you said, Keith, is on their path, and that's what they do. And that's it. Let it go. Otherwise, it'll haunt you.
I totally agree, Rick. And having a conversation with someone doesn't have to be confrontational. Like you said, I think there are some times that it's not necessary for you to let other people know that you're forgiving them. That's for you. Now, if you want to create a clearing for the other person to come and, for the other person to meet you there so that you can disappear whatever wrong that occurred or you think has occurred, you can certainly apologize to them in that way. But the key with that is if you know that you've done it for you, is that you have no expectation on how they're going to respond or react.
Yeah, that's really key. Yeah, because you get into that point where, hey, I've apologized. You haven't apologized to me. What the hell? Well, that's ego based, and that's just as bad as
more suffering. More suffering.
Doesn't get you anywhere, right? So you have to do all of this stuff without expectation. It's like the person who gives $100,000 to the symphony, but they want to have, you know, the program show that they've given $100,000 or have their name somewhere in a gold plaque in the building so everyone knows they gave 100. This is the opposite. It's giving the $100,000 anonymously and hoping no one finds out. The idea is that it's not something that has to be recognized by the ego as a joy. It has to be something you in your heart of hearts know is the right thing to do and feels good to do. So when you're talking about a clearing, there are some people who aren't going to meet you halfway. And I think there's also situations where you don't have to clear the air. You can simply go your own way and let it lie. But in your heart, you're free from being run by that need to be right or to get back at them. You'd forgive them, let it go, and carry on with your life. They don't even know what the hell happened.
Exactly. And so how do you know that ego is present when it comes to forgiveness? Is that if you can't let it go. It's simple. It's simple. How do you know now? How do you know when it's you? Because you can't let it go. Now that doesn't mean that the wrong hasn't happened. That doesn't mean that this person's behavior isn't conscious. All that could be true. But in terms of your experience of the present moment, your experience of being with this other person, if you can't let it go, then that's when you know it's ego. Now, there's a such thing as healthy boundaries. And that's what you're talking about, Rick, when you said, hey, you can just go different paths, or you can do other things, you can put things in place. And we've done 2 podcasts on healthy boundaries. And I got a feeling that, we may get a request to do a third one on a slightly different subject. But really what the key is just being really clear that this thing called life, it has an expiration date on it, and for the physical form. And because of that, how do you want to spend it? That's really what, for me, what it boils down to.
Yes, that's right. And that's your choice idea. That's what we were saying earlier. Every moment is a choice. Every moment is a choice between what you let in, what you struggle with, what you let go, and how much space you want to create for your joy and personal happiness. It's always a choice. People don't get that. They think that they're compelled to be a certain way by circumstance. No, the circumstance is a stimulus. Your response is your life.
Absolutely. And for many years, I was so trapped in my narrative, identified with it and with ego, that I was unaware that there was a choice. And how do you know that you're unaware of a choice? When somebody gives you one and you still say, I don't have a choice here. No, you don't understand. Okay. Oh, I understand. I really understand, but that's okay. That's your path. You know what? When will people stop suffering? When they've suffered enough. When will you know they suffered enough? Well, when they make a different choice. And so I just really when that comes up for me, and I have made a ton of progress, not in terms of trying to get somewhere, but in terms of just expanding my capacity to be loving, to be forgiving. That has really, really expanded because it's practice. Now, what has helped me with this practice? The people in my life who I think, that I need to forgive, who I think have wronged me, they've been my teachers. So if you're in an intimate relationship and that shows up for you to where you're having trouble letting go, that person is your teacher. And so you just continue to practice with that. I guarantee you, if they push your buttons or you feel like they bring you to tears, if you're able to overcome that with that person, oh, you're gonna be good to go. With whoever else shows up in your life, you're like, oh, that's trivial. I've done this before. This is nothing for me. But you have to you have to see them as a gift and see this as teachers. That doesn't mean that you've got to take on physical abuse or verbal abuse. That's where the healthy boundaries come in. And then lastly, I think, Rick, we might want to say a little something about forgiveness of yourself.
Well, it's like self-love, isn't it?
Yes.
It begins with you. It begins with you. And when you're talking about forgiveness of others, obviously there are things they've done that you don't like. There are things that we've done to other people that we don't like. Cheating, for example, not maybe being discovered by having been a cheater, violating our vows, or taken money that we shouldn't have, or overstepped our boundaries with respect to taking advantage of someone who's in a situation that was just ripe for the plucking. I think humans do that all the time. And I think that when something like that occurs, it's usually suppressed. There's usually a rational reason for it, or a rational rationalization, I should say, for it. People will justify all kinds of things, like I was born poor, I didn't have a crack at this, or they did it to me, or whatever those ego-based rationalizations are. Well, when you get to the point that you're talking about, where you're forgiving other people, part of that whole evolution of looking at life in a different way has to do with letting go of the self-criticism and that self-justification, as well as the self-criticism. And I think that naturally dissipates when you start letting go of ego, because it's not, what's it for? There's nothing to defend. There's okay, I stole your goat. I mean, it's terrible. Admit it, let it go. But you also need to do atonement, I think, as well. If you've done something that's harmed another person that you can remedy, then I think it's something that you need to spend some time doing. But my point is that when you're dealing with something in your past that's troubling, that is something that you have to look inside, figure out if there's a way that you can remedy it, and then you have to let your life go forward. Don't excuse it. I was wrong. This was a hell of a thing for me to do. I shouldn't have done it. I understand why I did it. It's not reasonable, and I hurt another person, and I'm dreadfully sorry for it. And I've got to forgive myself for doing that. I'm just human.
Exactly.
But the problem with that analysis is that people use that just human line for all kinds of crap, and that's just the opposite of what we're talking about. It's not, that's justification, that's back in the rationalization bucket. That's putting yourself back where you started that caused all the problems to begin with. We're talking about something that's totally different. That's just a release of negative energy about yourself that gets in the way of you experiencing joy, happiness, and helping other people, which is what our mission in life is as human beings.
Yeah, I think to your point, Rick, is the forgiveness of self, the one way to know that you've truly done it, instead of justifying, hey, I'm just human, is that the way that you show up moving forward after you have forgiven yourself, reflective of you really meaning it.
Yeah.
And so do you have a life and a body of work since the apology to yourself, or letting it go, that illustrates and honors that forgiveness? I think, and then if you don't, then you know that it's been justification and cognitive dissonance. You know in that moment that that's what's occurred. But I think the key is just like you said, man, is just, just really, really being clear that this life in the human form is a short one, and that you have a choice every day about how you want to spend it. And if you want to spend it, not feeling like you have, that you can forgive someone, that's one way to live. I'm choosing not to live that way. I lived that way for too many years, and those are lost to me. And I choose not to live that way anymore.
Good for you. That's wonderful, Keith.
Rick, thanks, Rick, for a great show, man.
Oh, my pleasure. I really learned something today. I should say this more often, but at every show we do, the more I shut up and listen, the more I am impressed with you and your life experience and your journey. And I learn something from you every show, and I really appreciate being with you.
That's how I feel about you, man. So this is awesome, man. I love you, Rick.
I love you too, Keith. Adios.
Adios.